Very nice to be with you all. And do put up questions as they come along to you. No cursing in the chat box, please. But otherwise, I hope you will enjoy giving us some input as well. It's been really fun. This is Patricia said this is my book. It's Ramdas's book, and it was very much a collaboration over about 10 years, and it's been a good ride. I'm sorry he's not around to field the questions himself, but he absconded with usual perfect timing before he had to take on this particular task. So I'm holding the bag, as it were. And Saraswati has kindly consented to visit with me. I think the last time I was in Asheville, no, there was a time in between, but anyway, I did do a live appearance at Malaprop, I think practically 10 years ago, when we were circulating Be Loved Now. And I think at the time Ramdas came along on my laptop on Skype from Maui.
Yep, that's right.
Trying to figure out how to do that tonight, but I haven't quite got the tech down for that one yet. But let's just talk about Ramdas and Saraswati. I'd love to hear from you, kind of first off, about your first encounter with him, because you kind of met him a little later on than I did. I was at the early end when he first came back from India.
Sure, Ramesh. I met Ramdas in around the year 2000.
Whoops, let's get rid of that.
No worries.
Sorry about that.
Yeah, well,
I just said I was going to
broadcast, so there you go. You all know.
It's live.
It's live. Yeah, so I, met Ramdas in 2001 or 2 in Los Angeles. And, I was just catalyzed by his teachings. I felt like, I'd actually found out about Ramdas through Krishnadas. And I had a really mystical experience the first time I heard Krishnadas. I was just transported and listened to Krishnadas's chanting for probably the next year straight. And it was then after meeting Krishnadas in person that I kind of found my way to Ramdas and met him in Los Angeles. And I just, I don't know what happened, but from that point on, it was Ramdas 24 hours, 7 days a week. I just couldn't get enough and just devoured everything that came my way. And that was a point in my life where I was already a yoga practitioner. I was already an acupuncture practitioner, but I'm just the next 20 years, everything shifted in both of those practices, yoga and acupuncture, that incorporated some of his central teachings. Some of the most important ones to me have been about dropping my role and trying to understand what it means to inhabit our soul, that we have to drop the mind, about the planes of consciousness. And these are the things that I went on to teach in yoga and in acupuncture to my patients. So that I just, I felt like it's been a gold mine, and it still is. And as I was sharing with you recently, I still feel connected to him. Yeah. And that's part of the ways that he, part of his teachings. is that I'm not this body, or I'm so much more than this body. So it's just one of my planes of consciousness is the physical plane. So, yeah. Thanks.
This is probably just a little bit before you met him, but did that one come up? Oops, it didn't.
It's your library.
Yeah, that.
Oh.
That's kind of fun.
Yeah. That's
yeah, he
definitely forgetting his role there.
Mm-hmm. That was kind of his role for me, for sure. And my first meeting with him, I think, was I would say was really an encounter with his guru, who I went to see a couple of years after I met Ramdas. And it seemed like he had that ability to get out of the way and allow that deeper place to come through to others. And I thought I would read a piece from the book, which was actually before he met Maharaji, his guru. Let me see if I can find it quickly, which was one of the things we did in the book was to really go back through some of these primary experiences that he had had.
One that I loved while you're looking for that, one of the early experiences I loved is when in the book where he's talking about his first encounter with the soul.
Yeah, that's kind of what I'm going to read.
Oh, fabulous.
Which was his first psilocybin trip.
Well, there's that. That was sort of when he kind of, I think, recognized, that he could sort of distance himself, sort of the beginnings of the witness and some of that, I think. Definitely correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm even referring to a point before that when he was living with Dave McClellan, and it was Dave McClellan's wife.
Yes.
Mary, I believe. Is that right?
Mary.
And it was through observing her style, he talked about that was one of her way of being, was one of his first encounters with the soul. Do you recall it like that?
Yeah, Mary was a very, I think she was really the first really spiritual person that he had encountered.
Yeah.
And they were Quakers.
Yeah, right.
So they, and it was the first time Ramdas had really been out of his family element, away from home. And he's at graduate school at Wesleyan University in Connecticut, which coincidentally was where I went to school some years later. And David McClelland had brought him in as his graduate assistant, and Ramdas was working on his master's degree in psychology as Richard Alpert, not as Ramdas yet. And Mary and David really took him in, and Mary was just an extraordinary person. I got to know her in later years also.
An artist, I think. Yeah.
Marvelous artist. Let me see. I might even be able to pull up one of her paintings if I,
I think it's really significant.
Yeah.
Influence on him, and then, how that led into some of his explorations with psilocybin. Again, kind of really looking for that map of the soul and map of consciousness.
Mm-hmm. Let's see. It might be in. No.
Which, following that, while you're looking for that, and then the map of consciousness, that's continued to take him on his journey to India, which is, it took him through his psilocybin journey and realizing, as much as that gave him, that there were limitations there. I mean, he's told that story so much.
Well, what we did in the kind of process of the book was really to go back through some of those early formative experiences. And I think that he saw them in a slightly different perspective. But I'm going to read a bit, especially for those who, hadn't heard a lot of his talks. But this was in Cambridge in the early 60s in Tim Leary's kitchen. And he said, well, let me just read a short piece and then we'll go from there. Now it was my turn. Tonight I would journey into the unknown. I galumphed into Tim's house, knocking snow from my galoshes. There was a big blizzard in Boston at the time. And he said it was the biggest snowstorm of the season. Sitting in the kitchen was Allen Ginsberg. He was visiting from New York. Tim had not mentioned he'd be there, so I was surprised. The last time I'd seen him was at a poetry reading at City Lights Bookstore in San Francisco. I'm going to skip a little bit. I joined Alan at the kitchen table, and Tim brought out the psilocybin pills. We each took one, a relatively small dose of 10 milligrams. At first, the psilocybin felt comparable to a strong pot high, maybe a little more dramatic, a little more intense. But after a while, something else was clearly happening. My consciousness began feeling like it was merging with Alan's and Tim's. Our conversation grew more and more subdued as we relaxed and sank more deeply into a shared, nonverbal awareness. Suddenly, a dog that had been out playing in the snow belonging to Tim's son Jackie appeared in the kitchen. He was panting from exertion. The three of us watched him, alarmed. The dog's breath was so labored, we were afraid he might be dying. To our by now timeless minds, his mortal struggle to breathe was continuing too long. The psychodrama of the dog's survival flared. What should we do? It was late Saturday night. We could hardly carry the dog 4 miles through a blizzard to the vet. We were all high. We couldn't be sure if the dog's state, much less our own. Were we perceiving accurately, or were we projecting from our hallucinatory world? Our collective concern mounted. The dog went into a nearby room and appeared to collapse. We called Jackie, who was upstairs watching TV. Jackie was not pleased about having his show interrupted, but the crisis resolved instantly when the dog, on hearing the 11-year-old's voice, leaped back to life, ready to play some more. Distracted by the melodrama and concerned that I was wasting my trip, I moved to the partially darkened living room to sit alone on the couch. Then I sensed that there was someone in the corner of the room where a moment before there had been no one. Peering into the semi-darkness, I recognized the figure as none other than myself. There I was, a professor in cap and gown. It was as if the Harvard professor part of me had dissociated from the rest of me sitting on the couch. How interesting, an external hallucination, I thought. Well, I worked hard to get that faculty status, but it's just a role. I don't really need it. I settled back into the cushions, content to be separate from my professorial self. But a moment later, the figure changed. I leaned forward, straining to see. There I was again, this time as a cosmopolitan socialite, my charming and convivial social self. Okay, I thought. So that goes too. Again and again, the figure changed. In one figure after another, I recognized all my social and psychological roles. Now came my Richard Alpertness, my basic ego identity. I had always been Richard, going back to childhood when my parents first called me Richard, and I associated the name with who I was. Richard, you're a bad boy, so Richard had badness. Oh, Richard, aren't you handsome? And Richard felt beautiful. But where was Richard now? Was my Richardness just another role? Uh-oh. Sweat broke out on my forehead. I wasn't at all sure I could do without being Richard Alpert. What if I had amnesia and forgot who I was? Would it be permanent? Oh, what the hell, I thought. So I'll give up being Richard Alpert. I can always get a new social identity. At least I have my body. But then I looked down and I couldn't see my body. The couch was there, but there was no one sitting on it. A scream formed in my throat. Adrenaline shot through my bloodstream. My mouth went dry. I was about to yell for Tim when a calm, very intimate voice from inside what I didn't know, quietly asked, rather jocularly, considering how distraught I was. Okay, so who's minding the store? And it went on from there. There was, just want to read one more little piece of this without going into the whole thing. But I was just presence, unfettered by the usual slipstream of random thoughts, images, and sensations. I nestled into this sense of pure being, feeling my way into this timeless inner self that was independent of outer identity. I felt no need to do anything. Oops. I was home in my spiritual self in a way I'd never before felt or thought possible. It was non-conceptual and indescribable. So that feeling of home was something that Ramdas stayed with and cultivated and brought to others really for the rest of his life. And he considered that the spiritual heart. And Saraswati, you met him after the stroke, and that was a time when, you know, he had been such an accomplished storyteller and raconteur. But there was a different quality to him after the stroke. Do you want to describe what that was like, you know, kind of relative to all the recordings you'd heard and so on?
Yeah, it was super different, that's for sure. But what I learned from Ramdas in that time was definitely about the potency of the pause. Mm-hmm. And really, I learned a lot about listening and about his message being so clear to him at that point, like refined, like you said, it became this spiritual heart being our home, became so refined and clear over years that to me it felt like he was just transmitting that.
Yeah.
That you could just sit with him and there was a transmission happening around him, and you can sit in that field with him and it was palpable. You know, and even though that was going on, he was still teaching like tremendously, you know, regularly up until just the last couple of years, regular webinars. And as you let me know, he was doing the one-on-ones as what he would call heart to heart, you know, which makes sense. Heart to heart, one-on-one calls with people. you'd wait 2 years on a waiting list, but
Yeah,
other
it
than
was
that,
kind of a long line.
yeah. So, but yeah, that was, I think, a big part of the difference, that he, does have that huge intellect. He does have that humor. He does have that great storytelling capacity. He does have that, penetrating worldview and humor and humility. I mean, he just, no wonder he was such a magnet for all of us. I appreciated in his earlier kind of work that, just feeling like he was ahead of us on the path, but like not so far ahead. He was still kind of finding his way and sharing that. And then later on, so much of that was unspoken and more.
Yeah, it was interesting how how the sort of character of his audiences changed too, because I think there was a whole other wave of, especially quite young people, compared to me at that point anyway, coming through, who were really felt something and were drawn to that work on themselves in a way that maybe they had picked up from their parents or something. I don't know, or from chemical activities, which is sort of where a lot of us got pulled in from. But that evolution, I think, at that period in particular, was very interesting. Let me see if I can find a photo from that later time. This is from one of the only trips that he made to the mainland after he moved to Hawaii.
Just
this
a comment
is in
on
about 2005. That come up? No. Why isn't that working? Okay.
you have to pick the photo first.
Yeah, I did,
Yeah.
and then it didn't come up.
Okay,
there it goes.
You got it. Look at that.
So this is at the temple in Taos, New Mexico, and by this time Ramdas is wheelchair bound, and soon after this he really stopped traveling almost entirely, and made his home on Maui in Hawaii. We're back.
You were talking about the younger generation and, how people started to find Ramdas. I don't know what the biggest movement is. I know that, there was certainly outreach geared to trying to, pass the message on, and what is, how is the legacy going to be held of all of this body of 90 decades of teaching.
Well, one of the things that happened, of course, when he stopped traveling, was that with the people that were helping him, we got a lot of his talks digitized and up online, and he was able to work with people, as you said before, one-on-one, and also talk to groups. And then people began coming to Hawaii for retreats, which were at first quite small, probably 30 or 40 people. And then that grew to, we outgrew a couple of places, and it ended up being, 350 or 400 people at a resort that was really a lovely spot. It was called the Napili Kai Beach Resort, which happened to have the same initials as Neem Karoli Baba. So, of course, we called it the Neem Karoli Baba Resort. But I don't know whether we told the management that.
Yeah, but I think another piece to like a new generation coming on board. And by the way, when Ramesh talks about these talks and digital, there is a huge free digital opportunity to learn about Ramdas and all of his teachings through number one, the podcast on the Be Here Now network, as well as the media library on the website ramdas.org. So you can have access to, so much content. But just to say, to kind of loop back around, is I think that what I've found in my clinical practice, what I find in spiritual community, is that people are searching for meaning. I hear so much that I want more in my life. I just don't know what more is. And I think, there was a big part of young folks maybe kind of going down that social media rabbit hole, and cancel culture starting. I mean, just a lot of superficiality, and I think Ramdas really brings that opportunity to go deep into our authentic heart.
I think that ties back to how much his work on himself was about identity.
Yeah.
And one of the teachings that he really worked with a lot was what he called witnessing. And some of that came out of, real Buddhist Vipassana practice. But I remember asking him once in the course of working on the book, and I said, so the witness is like this kind of neutral observer place, right? And he said, no, the witness is part of the soul. In other words, it's part of that really deep inner heart space that is not identified with the what he referred to often as the incarnation, which, by the way, was one of the alternative titles for this book as we went along. We were going to call it Ramdas and Incarnation, because, he really saw this lifetime from that point of view, from looking at it as a lifetime. Because the way that and the way that I talked him into doing the book, actually, was to frame it as seeing his lifetime through Maharaji's eyes.
That's beautiful, Ramesh.
And let's see if I can pull up. There's one in Maharaji here. Let's see if this works.
I'm going to appreciate continuing to read the book
doesn't go
through that lens. I got to tell you.
Yeah. So, and that was kind of what convinced him to go through this process. As you know, he was Mr. Be Here Now, so going back over the past was not particularly in his wheelhouse most of the time. But this view through the guru's eyes, and maybe we can talk a little bit about what the guru represented for him. And you've had some experience with that now also, Saraswati, and perhaps you can talk about that mirroring process, because I think you experienced that with Ramdas.
So
do you want to take that one on, or do you want me to talk about it more? I can rattle on about it too, obviously.
Well, I'm just thinking about times that I've had with Ramdas that have been really essency, where he's kind of guided me into very deep places, into my own heart, into my own experience. One time, I'm remembering, I was...
There's one.
There's one. Yeah.
One of those times.
Oh, thank you, Ramesh. Yeah, that was more than, I don't know, maybe 10, 15 years ago, 10, 12 years ago.
Yeah.
One time I'll try to tell this story pretty quick. But this was, I believe, in 2008. And I had gone through a period of trying to conceive, to try to have a baby. And I'd actually gone to India to go to visit Maharaji's ashram, Neem Karoli Baba's ashram in the Kenchi ashram. And that's just near Nainital. And I sat with Siddhima, who's our great mother in India, who is Maharaji's great devotee. She's now dropped her body as well. But I sat with her and told her that I wanted to conceive.
Mm.
That I felt, there she is, Jay Mom. And I felt that I was forcing it, that I didn't want to just, I wanted her permission, and I wanted her blessing, and I wanted Maharaji's blessing. And she gave it to me. She said, go find the best doctor, because I needed to have a procedural.
Complicated.
Yeah, it was complicated. And that's why I felt like I was pushing it. So I went and I did it. It didn't work. And it didn't work. And I was sure that when I got that blessing, that her blessing meant baby. And I had no idea that her blessing just meant Saraswati's going to be on her journey,
Yeah.
And that's part of it, is wanting everything. And I think maybe doing everything. Maybe she saw a part of me I didn't see. But fast forward to about maybe 3 or 4 months later, I was in Maui in 2008. It was actually on the Big Island. Ramdas did that one retreat on the Big Island. And this is how generous he is. He had just had a hip replacement. He was unwell. He had already traveled to go to this retreat. And what I was really suffering, just feeling all the things like, devastated about this process. If it didn't work, does that mean Neem Karoli Baba is not my guru, and all of this. And I was mad, and I'm like, your guru told me to go do it. And I'm saying this to him is unbelievable. And finally he looked at me, and this is like, I tell you, I keep this with me. He looked at me and he goes, Saraswati, look at all that Maharaji is just squeezing out of you. Look at that. And that's how he taught. He didn't teach by telling you a whole bunch of things or give you a whole bunch of practices, and neither did his guru. But he taught you by being with him,
Yeah, I would say Maharaji's teaching was very existential that way. And Ramdas certainly brought that to other people. But also, I think he approached his own life that way. And that is pretty evident in his story. And in that sense, I think his story is kind of a parable for everyone to work with in their own lives. He went through a lot. Let's see, I'm going to see if I can pull up this one from, let's see if this works.
Ramesh, I was wondering if you feel like talking about how it was to work with Ramdas.
Yes, we can certainly talk about that. So, is this one coming up?
Yeah.
This was the last time he made it to India, and it was after the stroke. And I think that he had thought really he probably wouldn't get back there. But this was 2004, and we had, my wife and I had taken our kids, who were 5 and 7 at the time, and I think Ramdas figured, okay, if they can get there with their kids, I should be able to pull it off too. And he did, and it was amazing. And he had that really beautiful time with Siddhima at the Kenchi Ashram, where he had been originally learned yoga and had first been stationed by Maharaji.
Yeah.
So it was a very powerful time. And then he went back to the States, and it was, I think, a long journey. He went back across the Pacific to California, and then was only home for a day, and then turned around and went to Hawaii to run a retreat. And after the retreat, he ended up in the emergency room with 103 fever or something like that. And that was an infection that had kind of, he had probably had underlying for a while, but it flared up in India, and then the travel really made it bad, and he was septic, and that nearly took him out too. It was kind of the...
That was in 2005, and that's when he...
Yeah, that
That's
was
when he did
2000, late 2004 into early 2005.
Yeah, I remember that. And then he stayed in Maui from that point on, I believe.
Yes, yeah. Although he did do that one trip where you saw him in at the Taos ashram, and
Yeah.
then he made one last trip. Let's see if I can get this one up.
Taos,
This was
right?
fun. Yeah.
I was so positive that wasn't going to happen. I didn't even consider going because I was positive. And look at this.
Yeah.
Unbelievable. I mean, I didn't even consider going. I mean, I did consider it, but I mean,
Yeah.
I never thought he'd make it.
I didn't think he'd make it either, but he did.
Look at him.
And he was absolutely determined. This was the opening of a new temple at the Taos ashram, which Ramdas was the official president of. And I remember in Maui, people were trying to discourage him from going because his body was so frail at that point. And he banged his hand on the table and said, "I'm going." And he did.
And he, he's a yoga guru and in his soul and everything, but he bangs his hand on that table. He means it.
Yeah, no, there was a component of very powerful will.
Very powerful
that he had. That it was not just there is that combination of surrender and will, and sometimes it's the will to surrender. But that those were the qualities that took him through, and he was always rather. The beginning of the book talks about him being a risk taker, and he was pretty fearless about doing whatever it was that he needed to do, and he really listened inside about that.
That determination really showed up in the way he, not that many people spend so long in a wheelchair post-stroke. You know? I mean, that is unusual that he had 20 or 25 years, something, a long time, and pursued, if you ever sat with him, he would have like 8 little glasses of different medicines that he'd drink morning and night. And he'd have like at least, 30 or 40 different pills. And he would sit there and they were all geared to, he was really into integrative medicine and so forth. So he was so well taken care of. But just to speak to that will,
Yeah. This is the woman in sort of purple on the left is Dasima, who was a retired human resources executive who had been one of his students for years, and she came and took care of him in Hawaii. And she was the one who organized all those pills, too. She
sure did. I took care of him. I think I was talking to you about this for a couple of weeks. I had my chance to set all his drinks out and sit there with him. It was one just tremendous joy of my life was spending that time with him, taking care of him.
That was those were pretty good times. It was amazing that he had such a run after. I mean, he was not expected to live from the stroke in the first place,
Yeah.
and he got another more than 20 years out
Yeah,
of that.
absolutely.
So remarkable. Are we moving toward the time we should start taking some questions, Patricia?
Yes, we are. Are you
Are there
ready for
many?
that? There are some, and I'd like to kick it off if that's okay.
Yeah, let's do that.
Wonderful. I'm going to just kind of kick it off here with a question that I have. My first introduction to Ram Dass was in the 2002 documentary Hoffman's Potion.
Huh.
And I remember seeing him.
I don't think I've ever seen that.
Oh, really? Is that true? Wow.
I'll
Okay.
have to look for that.
Oh, yes. It's a very good documentary that deals with the history of LSD and its early uses.
Mm-hmm.
Ram Dass, of course, appears in it and talks about, his own personal history and what he's learned. And so for one of the things that I'm very curious about is the collaborative process with someone who has had such a storied, nuanced, fascinating life. So how do you synthesize a memoir as a co-author with him? And did you ever have any disagreements and you won some and then he won some?
He won all the important ones, but it was a process. It was really, and it was over a long period of time because partly because of his aphasia and partly because I live in New York and the East Coast, and he was in Hawaii, and we'd go back and forth. We worked on over Skype and on the phone sometimes, and then I would go out there a few times a year and usually spend 10 days or so. But the process itself was really collaborative because I would kind of interview him, and his aphasia was such that he was still speaking quite slowly. So I'm not the greatest stenographer that ever lived. So I was able to keep up with him pretty much just typing on the laptop. At first I started recording things and then transcribing them, but we got into more of a mode where I would write things and then read them back to him, and he would we would kind of mull things over together, sometimes go into greater detail, and I was kind of interviewing him about pieces, especially some of those events where, he'd told the same story a zillion times. But now we were really looking at it in sort of in the a deeper way and in the context of the other things that had gone on around it, like his meeting with Maharaji, which he had originally felt was, he felt like it was Maharaji's psychic powers that really had opened him up. And because there was this story about his mother and, Maharaji had told him things about his mother that there was no way anybody could know. And yet it became clear to Ram Dass that Maharaji knew everything that was in his mind. And he essentially ascribed that to a siddhi, or Maharaji's mind-reading power. But over time, he realized that it had been really a heart opening, and that it was Maharaji's love that had really opened him up and opened his heart.
You've known Ram Dass for years. What surprised you in the creation of this book? What did you walk away with and say, I just had no idea?
Well, I didn't know much of his early life for sure. And there were a lot of stories that came into this book that are part of his growing up. And I think you see much more who he is coming out of that childhood, to both some of the things that were hard for him to deal with. His family his father particularly, they were very power and achievement oriented. His father was chairman of a big railroad on the east, the New Haven Railroad, which was, covered 5 or 6 states, and eventually went bankrupt. And he put Ramdas to work at the railroad at one point, because he had been made president and he had no idea how to run a railroad. And he just said, I need somebody I can trust here. Would you come for a while and, help me out? And Ramdas was in the middle of his graduate doctoral degree, but he came, and he was going back and forth from Stanford on the West Coast to New York City.
He's going back and forth every week.
Yeah.
I mean, he wasn't just going back and forth. He was really going back and forth.
And this is pre-jet aircraft. So the commute was like, 12 hours each way. So there was a lot of those pieces of it. But I think also the richness of his relationships with people, and some of the stories of I interviewed other people besides Ramdas, like the guy that he traveled to India with, David Padwa, who very kindly gave us copies of his journals from that trip, which I think had never really, we hadn't had that kind of detail available before, and we couldn't fit it all in the book by any means, but it was, I think there's a more vivid picture of him as a full human being. And I hope that comes through in the book a bit, but I think that makes his teaching contribution even richer in a way.
When you think about the audience for this book that you and he wrote together, who is your, or how did the two of you kind of come up with, or did you ever think about your ideal reader? Because I know that there are a lot of people who think they know who Ram Dass is and kind of have him trapped in amber, frozen in the 60s, right? Like that. And then there are people who, kind of have him trapped in amber in India, or where. And it seems to me like the challenge would be to kind of, or maybe you didn't consider, how do we, for whom is this book written? And did you think about that?
Well, it was written, for ourselves to a great extent. But my hope has been that his story would be more of a parable for more people, and especially the ways that he was really searching for identity. And there's the part that we haven't spoken about this evening at all, about the ways that he brought a different approach to service into this culture, especially around dying, the work that he did in prisons to bring spiritual practice into prisons, something he called the Prison Ashram Project originally. And then the teaching that he did around the Bhagavad Gita. He did this whole course in the first summer of Naropa in 1974, which is was really, that those qualities of the Bhagavad Gita, which is this story it's a dialogue on a battlefield between a warrior prince and God. And the basic ethic that he imparts is to do your work without expectations, to do your work because you have to do your work, but you don't worry about how it's going to turn out. That's not up to you. And that's the way that, he characterized selfless service, which the Sanskrit, or I don't know whether it's Sanskrit or Hindi, the word is seva. And then he worked with a group called the Seva Foundation that was doing blindness work and other work in cultures that really needed help.
When you think about the finishing up the book and how did Ram Dass experience the process? Like you said very early on in the event, we really don't have him here to whom we can pose questions, and so do you have any sense of how he was experiencing that process and as close to the end result as he could, what he was thinking about it as it was winding up?
Well, first of all, we had a lot of fun doing it, and we laughed a lot. Second, I think it really allowed him to, in his own process, to release some of the events, especially, stuff from his childhood that he hadn't thought about in a long time, but some of which was still kind of sticky, as he probably would have put it. We talked about his sexuality in ways that I don't think he'd really gone into a whole lot before. And, during the time we were completing the book, he found out he had a son, which, it blew other people away, but also really was a kind of different take for him, because he had never really expected to have any kind of nuclear family. And his son and his family are lovely, and they came to visit pretty regularly after that was uncovered in about 2009 or so, I think. No, it was after that, a little after that. But he was in his 80s by then, close to.
That's a late in life discovery.
It sure is. Yeah.
Wow. So it sounds to me like, of course, as you were describing that and him kind of having a reckoning with his childhood and some of the things that had happened to him, it reminds me of what he said to Saraswati about an experience ringing you out. Aren't you glad that you've had that? And I think that's pretty amazing.
That's his son.
Oh my goodness.
Photo.
Well, that also really captures what you're talking about, laughing and having a lot of fun.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
And I like it. And I like those photos for that. All the photos you've shown.
That's been a fun part of the book, is getting the photos in there. And his Ram Dass's niece has a wonderful kind of library of the family photos, which she was very generous with, and that was a great contribution along the way too. Lots of people. This really was kind of took a village to make this book. I had some good editorial help, and the Sounds True people who published it have really put in a major effort into it. So that part has been humbling and inspiring.
One of the we're getting to the top of the hour, but I know that the two of you said if we ran over a little bit, you were very generous and said you're okay with that. So I want to let the audience know that this will be available for you to view later after it's edited on our YouTube channel. So it's okay if you have to step away at the top of the hour, and We understand it's the virtual experience, and other things are calling. But there's a question for Saraswati from our audience, and it is, can you sum up the impact of meeting Ram Dass and what it had on the trajectory of your life, and
Mm.
what you would want someone who doesn't know him to know?
Um, I mean, Ramdas had a huge impact on my life. One of the most memorable is an experience when I was in my doctoral program. And I had been practicing for about 10 years as an acupuncturist with a master's degree, which is an entry-level position. And you can get more education if you want to, which I did. And at that time, that was in the early 2000s, the program was rigorous with Western medicine. Like that's the way you actually advanced, was to become more integrative, which was great. But it was very much, things are very black and white, and you had to justify everything. There couldn't be any gaps. There couldn't be any mysterious, nothing. Everything had to be absolutely grounded and founded in physical reality. It was medical school. And then at the same time, I was working with Ram Dass, and he's like, drop your role and move into your soul, and you aren't your body. You're not who you're not. You're not a daughter. You're not a doctor. You're not a wife. You're not any of these things. So drop your personality, drop your emotions. So I'm getting all of this, and at the time also, Ram Dass was. Well, I was listening to content about when he was working in a hospice situation with dying people. And he said part of the key to that work for him was dropping his role. That as long as he went into the clinical encounter, sitting bedside with dying people, as long as he went in as helper and helped, that kind of kept everybody separate. But when you move into an exchange, an experience, and you drop the role, that you can somehow find your way into resonance with the other person, where it's so much less personal. You can let all of that drop away and just be souls together. That's what he talked about a lot. And that's what I think has been a key piece in my work as a doctor. And I think that is such a generous way to be with other people, is to let them out of being boxed in by their role and try to really see the way we're the same as opposed to the way we're different. So.
One of the things that really struck me about your conversation this evening, and really what I have come to understand or begin to learn about Ram Dass, is an acceptance of death and dying. And I think that there is a real fear of it, even talking about it. And since we're in the midst of a pandemic, I think the anxiety and fear is even more acute. In fact, maybe unprecedented in living memory. So I'd be interested in, maybe both of you can talk just a little bit about this. What do you hope that people would take away, either from the book or from your knowing Ram Dass, about death and dying, and what maybe we could even learn from it?
Well, a couple things. If I'll just jump in quickly, and then Ramesh, you can take this question. But a couple things that I just came right to mind as you were asking the question are some things that he would say a lot, and his teachers or colleagues had shared with him, which is, one is death is like taking off a tight shoe. Death is like taking off a tight shoe. And another is death is perfectly safe. He would say that a lot. Death is perfectly safe. So Ramesh, you go ahead.
Well, um, there were some rough spots along the way, and I was with him when he left his body. This was, oops, that went away too. Okay. Is that up now? Anyway, this was taken quite shortly before Ramdas died.
It's up.
Yeah. And his passing was just really extraordinary. It was the first time I'd been with somebody when they stopped breathing. And it was, took a little while. His breathing reflex was going on for a bit. And, but you could tell that he had, I could tell that he had left before his body was done in some way, and that his presence was still so strong there. And that continued. We kept his body at the house for a few days, and people came and sat. It was very powerful. And I think that what I have taken from his teaching about death, and he really did confront death, and not in a, it wasn't a shallow way. I think he really saw it as a great passage. And I think he lived that and died into that. And I was with him when my daughter was killed. She was at home and was run over on her bike while I was in Maui, and I had to fly back. And it was very, it's the worst thing that can happen for a parent. And he was totally present with me and there with my anguish. And that was, it was very real, and at the same time, he helped me find a little shred of that, view of my daughter's death as her incarnation. And it wasn't just about my grief, which was profound, but it was also about seeing her life as her life and a life, and that, all of our leases run out at some point. And he faced that. He faced that with his own life. He wasn't afraid to sit with people who were leaving, who were dying. And in fact, he sought it out for, I think, a long time, especially during the AIDS crisis. So
That's very remarkable, and I'm going to thank you for sharing your own story as well. That leads me to a question that one of the audience members posed. This is from Kamal Sundari. Rameshwar, I have a question. Ram Dass in his later years said he, quote, wasn't a guru, find another one, end quote. But I wonder, what do you think?
Well, he also said you're not who you think you are. So what I think is probably irrelevant. But, his conception of guru, I think, was very different from what we think of as, especially, the transplanted gurus from India who have come to the West, and some of them we've adopted, and some have, bought a lot of Rolls Royces or whatever. It's been a mixed bag. But his view of the guru is that the guru is inner, and that the guru is a mirror for the soul, for our innermost self. And he often repeated what the great Indian saint Ramana Maharshi said about that, which is that Guru, God, and the true self, the self with capital S, are the same. And I think that was his view of Maharaji, our guru, also. And I was with Ramdas when we were up at his family's farm in New Hampshire when a telegram came from India. This was in the days when there were still telegrams. And it said, Maharaji has dropped his boje, which was a misprint.
Right.
It was a telegraphic misprint. It meant Maharaji left his body, had died. And we had assumed Maharaji was going to be there forever or for a long time, or, he seemed the picture of vitality, and he certainly had plenty of energy when we were there. But he took a sudden departure. And, as I said about Ramdas leaving me holding the bag, he left us all holding the bag. It was after that, it was kind of it was sink or swim. And what he had given us, we had to find that in ourselves and use it as best we could. And Ramdas was not that grief-stricken when Maharaji died, because he had that, his connection to Maharaji was not to that body. I don't know if that answers anything, but
I think it answers.
That's helpful.
I think it answers things and it raises more questions, which I think a great response does. I think that's wonderful. Well, and I guess I'd like to kind of wrap up by asking you what's next. Is that a fair question of somebody in your what's next is sort of I guess it's too much of an expectation, like you've got to continue something.
Yeah. I honestly don't know at this stage. And, what we're doing tonight is part of this sort of virtual book tour, rolling out the book. And it sort of has its own life now, which I'm very happy about. And I think Ramdas would be also. So we'll see. Or as one of our Indian friends used to say, as the blind man says, let us see. And I feel that way. I'm in the great I don't know. And there are lots of things I'd love to do. I like to garden. I want to catch up on my photographic work a bit. And it's been great fun excavating all of the material that we did. And there's lots more that didn't, get past the cutting room floor, as it were. So we'll see. There are a lot of resources in the foundation. As Saraswati was referring to, ramdas.org is this kind of vehicle for disseminating Ramdas and Maharaji's teachings. And we're working on that too. So I'm sort of getting to the phase of my life also where I'm supposed to be cleaning up instead of making more mess. So I think that'll be part of it.
Is that a real thing? I don't know. Okay, if you say so. I think I heard the titles of 3 great book titles in the answer you gave. So just write that down, audience, because I think we've got some great book titles we can try to get Ramesh to think about. I want to thank you both for being here this evening in a very heartfelt and in some moments very tender, and then thought-provoking, and then humorous, and also really candid and almost, I guess, unvarnished. And I don't think we have enough of those conversations. And I'm so glad that this was really one of them. And it was a pleasure to be here with you all. And thank you, audience. I'll just close by saying Rameshwar Das is the co-author of Being Ram Dass. He wrote that book with Ram Dass, and that is a book that you can purchase at Malaprops. We hope if you can't purchase it from Malaprops, that you will make a conscious choice to support your independent bookstores wherever you live, anywhere around the world. Because just like our founder, Emika at Malaprops, she really believed that independent bookstores were the place of creativity and community, and a place where people could share ideas, sort of like Saraswati was talking about, where you drop your roles and then you try to find some resonance or connection. And I believe Emika thinks that is through the creative endeavor. So the two of you're uniquely positioned to be here be here now.
Well,
yes,
I hope I get to be there in person now sometime again too.
We hope you will as well. We really want you to do that, and we're so glad to have had this chance to just spend a little time with you both. I want to thank you again, and thank you, audience, for being with us. And I hope you both stay well and have a lovely evening, and look forward to the great whatever happens next.
Yeah, if you send the YouTube our way, also we'll also put it up on the ramdas.org site.
And Ramesh, I just want to also just tell you and tell the audience, just this book is great. I mean, this is a great book. It is. Just like you, I've learned so much about Ramdas and different. So it's fabulous. You'll just be turning the pages, so you'll love it. Thank you, Ramesh.
You can just look at the pictures too.
Yeah, and the pictures. Thank you, Patricia, for having us.
Thank you so much, Patricia.
Thank you so much.
Lovely to
have
it hosted so beautifully.
I hope you have a good evening. Thank you.
Okay.
Good night. Bye-bye.